Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy, a proud member of the Sightcraft Network. The goal of this podcast is to demystify therapy, what can happen in therapy, and the wide array of conversations you can have in and about therapy. Through personal experiences, guests will talk about therapy, their experiences with it, and how psychology and therapy are present in many places in their lives, with lots of authenticity and a touch of humor. Here is your host, Steve Bisson.
Getfree.ai. Yes, you've heard me talk about it previously in other episodes, but I'm going to talk about it again because Getfree.ai is just a great service. Imagine being able to pay attention to your clients all the time instead of writing notes and making sure that the note's going to sound good and how are you going to write that note and things like that. Getfree.ai liberates you from making sure that you're writing what the client is saying, because it is keeping track of what you're saying and will create, after the end of every session, a progress note. But it goes above and beyond that. Not only does it create a progress note, it also gives you suggestions for goals, gives you even a mental status if you've asked questions around that, as well as being able to write a letter for your client to know what you talked about. So that's the great thing. It saves me time, it saves me a lot of aggravation, and it just speeds up the progress note process so well. And for $99 a month, I know that that's nothing. That's worth my time. That's worth my money. You know, the best part of it too is that if you want to go and put in the code Steve50 when you get the service, at the checkout code is Steve50, you get $50 off your first month. And if you get a whole year, you save a whole 10% for the whole year. So again, Steve50 at checkout for getfree.ai will give you $50 off for the first month. And like I said, get a full year, get 10% off, get freed from writing notes, get freed from always scribbling while you're talking to a client, and just paying attention to your client so they win out, you win out, everybody wins. And I think that this is the greatest thing. And if you're up to a point where you got to change the treatment plan, well, the goals are generated for you. So getfree.ai, code Steve50 to save $50 on your first month. Alors, c'est Tigidou, mon affaire. Everything is hunky-dory. That's the best translation I can find. Welcome to episode 198 of Finding Your Way, Resilience, Development, and Action. If you haven't listened to episode 197, it's with the mental men. Bob, Dennis, Andy, Chris, and Pat came in, and I hope you go back and listen to it because it was a really good episode. But with episode 198, I really want to talk about the myths about therapy. You know, maybe you don't know this, but if you're listening to my show, I like to write. And right now I'm trying to write a book based on some of the concerns that some first responders had in regards to going to therapy. So I'm like, hey, besides promoting my future book, which, you know, it's getting about, a quarter way done at this point, I wanted to promote a little bit of that, but more importantly, talk about some of the myths of therapy. And yes, I can't pronounce my THs right, so hey, make fun of me all you want. But what I'd like you to do is to really think about some of the stuff that people think about therapy and then go from there. So the first thing I would like to talk about is, you know, what happens when we close the door? So you will know, this is unfiltered therapy. We learn things from TV that are not true, number one. Number two, in therapy, and you know, like I remember my training, and yes, I do remember that far back for those who are going to make fun of my age, but yes, when I trained I did in the late 90s, early 2000s for my master's, we learned a lot of different things. And I give shout out to Peter Toscano, among others. Len Dorfler had a great influence on me too, from Assumption, now University. At the time it was a college. They taught me a whole lot, and Peter was good at breaking down some of these myths. And I really want to make sure I bring it up to you guys. So here's a few of them that you can discuss, and I wanted to discuss with you, and you can tell me what you think about. The first thing is swearing in therapy. Well, if you listen to this podcast, I swear. I feel I should swear right now, but it's not appropriate, but I do swear. And in therapy, clients will swear as well as I will. And we don't swear at each other. We swear about situations. We swear about other things. But you can swear in therapy. And I've heard people before saying, that's not appropriate. That's not right. I'll tell you one thing. Nothing's more authentic than a good fuck. Really well placed. Or shit, or think about any expletive that you can think about. The reason why is that it's authentic. It came from the heart. And once you start filtering what you feel in your heart, what is therapy about? Being authentic, being yourself. So I would encourage anyone to change that. I would really encourage people to kind of do that. I remember the first time someone said to me something that I thought was really screwed up. And I said, wow, it's really fucked up. And they were like, I appreciate it. You told me the truth. I'm the only one I thought felt that way. So sometimes being real is so important. And that's part of it too, is like, I think that the other part that people tend to forget is that real, authentic reaction is very, very important. Sometimes I'll go like this. And I try not to do too much when we're going into deep trauma and someone's already having emotions. But ultimately, I can have my expressions because it makes me authentic. You know, the humanizing of therapists is quite a movement that's going on now. But at the end of the day, we need to be able to authenticize ourselves as therapists so clients can be authentic with us. So for me, it's okay to have reactions to what's being said. And I said, of course, if someone's talking about, trauma or something like that, I really go and let them talk. I don't really match at that point. I just listen. I remember someone telling me about a really, really difficult, traumatizing experience, and I'm going to really not talk about it because I don't want any identifiers. And yes, that I believe in the ethics of not putting any identifiers on people. But I remember going, geez, I can only imagine it was really screwed up and really fucked up as a situation. And they burst into tears and like, I never said this to anyone. I was afraid people would make fun of me. People would not think it's that bad. And you really had a great reaction. So I think that for me, giving those examples is really important because that's what help that individual heal. So I don't want to go into too much details because I don't want to identify anyone. So I hope that makes sense. And the other truth is that we're human. I said that earlier, but one of the things that happens is clients wonder if we think about them outside a session. Of course we do. Do we think about it in any creepy way? Of course not. I'm not a creep, but I certainly think about people professionally. I was in New York City last week and I have a few clients who are from that area. And I remember walking in a couple of areas where I think they grew up. So I was wondering if Jane Doe, John Doe, I wonder if they went there, if they went near here, or what have you. So I think that sometimes it's important to realize that we think about our clients outside the session. When a client has had a pretty rough session, I'll text them the day after. Is that something that everyone does? Of course not. But I do it because, hey, you know what? You were having a tough time. Let me know about it. Most of my clients really appreciate that because they feel like they're being listened to and they know how difficult and they think that I understand how difficult it is for them. So I really like to do that. The other part too that I really want to remind people is my life isn't perfect. In fact, I don't know of any therapist whose life is perfect. And that's okay. One of the things that I like to remind people is I'm in therapy too. I have stuff I got to work on, and hopefully I'll be working on my stuff for the rest of my life. I know that therapies, people say we only use it when we need it, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. My view is we can all use therapy. Do we need it all weekly, daily? No. Do we even need it every other week? No. I mean, I go to my therapist right now every 5 weeks, 6 weeks. I'm doing pretty good right now, which is great. But I do have my own problems, and yeah, I do my best with my kids, but sometimes that's hard. I have relationships, sometimes they're hard. And it's okay to be able to talk about that when clients ask me if I'm perfect, I'm far from being perfect. And it's okay for you to start thinking about your therapist not being perfect. Authenticity, being yourself, is very important. And that when a therapist is not perfect, I think that helps the authenticity of the individual. We handle our own struggles. If I'm having a good hard time, even on podcasts right now, you have no clue if I'm having a hard time right now. I don't believe I'm having a hard time right now. I'm knocking on wood. I guarantee you my desk is made of wood. But sometimes I do have my own stuff. I don't bring it to session. I really handle my own struggles. But sometimes I gotta really think about my own stuff and not let it bleed out in the session. But we all have it, right? We all have health issues. We all have family members. We all have things that goes on. So just remember, for those of you who I don't think I mentioned it on the podcast yet, I had surgery a few weeks ago, a gallbladder removal, tucked in a hernia, and I took a few days off. But ultimately, I probably should have taken a little more time off. When I came back, I did okay, but like I think it was a Tuesday. Tuesdays I work late here. One of my later clients, looked at me. She said, "Don't take this the wrong way, but you look like shit." And I said, well, if it makes you feel any better, I feel like shit. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry. We can cut the session short. I'm like, no, I can handle it. But if I can't, I'll let you know. And people think about that as well. You share too much. No, I think it's good to tell people I have limits. I have issues. And there's sometimes I don't know where to set a limit. She helped me set that limit. And sometimes we learn from our clients, which is another thing that we'll get to. But we learn from our clients as much as you learn from us. And any therapist that say they don't, I wouldn't trust them, frankly. But that's one of them. And then the other thing too is, you know, I've been through a divorce, very amicable with my ex-wife. She's pretty good actually. But sometimes, bringing that journey of my own struggles with divorce, because as amicable as it was tough. It's hard to go through a divorce for anyone. And sometimes I bring that experience to the session, not to tell people this is how you're going to feel, but they sometimes ask me questions. And I've also heard someone say, well, if you do couples counseling and you've been divorced, how can you tell them you've been in a relationship and you don't know how to make it last, which is truthfully something once said to me. And I say, well, I also knew that sometimes things don't work out, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So being able to talk about that is so important so that you're authentic and people can say, oh, he's been there, done that, has a few t-shirts. And yeah, my personal struggles, I don't bring them like, oh my God, my blank has been difficult with me, whatever that is. But I certainly have my own growth, my own struggles, and I bring them to the session. And most people feel that authenticity and that truthfulness really helps. The other part too is I try not to talk out of my ass. So I don't say things I don't know, but sometimes I make mistakes. Every therapist I know makes mistakes. The true good therapist will point out, you know what, I made a mistake last time. This is what I did said. I meant this. Or when I said that, that was absolutely wrong. This is why you should think about it this way. We make mistakes. Why? Because we're human. And if someone says, well, you're in the medical field, you cannot make mistakes. Well, I would argue that every medical doctor, every nurse, and everyone I've ever met in the medical field has admitted to a mistake or two. Makes us human. And also, it's okay to learn from these mistakes. One of the things I'm really terrible with, this is going to be oops moments for me. I'm so bad with names. Anyone who knows me knows that. I think I mentioned it here before, but sometimes I'll go like, how's your husband, Frankie? And they're like, well, my husband's name is Johnny. Oh, crap. And most people laugh because I tell them right off the top, I'm no good with names. So that's how I learn from them. And then I say, the other part too is because I've always been bad with names. And yes, if you want to send me tricks about how to remember names, please do so. However, I've tried pretty much anything under the sun, but I do remember a story really well. And what I tell people is when I make a mistake like that, I say, well, your husband, he works in the computer science field. He works with blah, 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 blah. Like, oh, you remember his story. I'm really good at remembering stories. I'm just not good with names. So remembering the stories, remembering what's going on, that's more important to me than remembering Johnny, Jane, or Frank. So, kind of remembering that. And being imperfect shows clients how being imperfect is okay for them too. I think that sometimes we struggle with realizing that we can make mistakes and it's difficult to admit. But I make mistakes, I think I've been known in my soccer training. When I used to coach soccer, I'd tell the girls, if I don't make 10 mistakes in a day, I've had a pretty good day. It's okay. And it makes me a better therapist because I learn. It actually came up today. They asked me, like, do you think you're the best therapist? I'm like, by far, no. I'm not the worst therapist, but I'm up there. And people are like, well, that may be arrogant. I'm like, no, but I know I have to learn. And learning is key. A few years ago, I didn't know what IFS stood for, internal family systems. So, I'd say, like, I don't know what it is. And being imperfect and not knowing everything made them realize, oh, I can educate them. And we had a conversation. I studied it afterwards. So when they came back home to the session, not home, I was able to have that conversation. And so it's important to have those moments where you don't know, make a mistake, share it, and then better yourself. I like to learn every day. I like to learn. Anyone who knows me, I read a lot of nonfiction. Yeah, sometimes I probably should go into fiction, but I like to take these learning experiences, whether it's from books or TV shows. Yes, TV shows taught me a lot. Numbers, among others. It's not very old. Well, I guess for younger people, it would be old, 10, 15 years old, but I learned a lot from those TV shows. And sometimes that's what makes me better, to always learn from any situation. And I share my personal stories. We talked about the divorce, but I also think that I share other stories. Like when I had the issue, I have clients who have fears of planes, and I know right now a lot of people do. But as you probably saw, I can't remember the episode number. It was about 2 years ago. So what would be the low 90s? I was on a plane where someone tried to take over the plane. I was as raw as I could on this podcast. So go back and listen to that if you want to. If you want me, I'll link it to the show notes. But I think that what happened is, again, I was able to show that I also have moments of doubt, moments I feel difficult, and it's okay to share that experience because being perfect to me is irrational. And we talk about perfectionism and all that in my sessions, particularly with the cognitive behavioral stuff. But I'm able to share that. Did I share those experiences when I was still struggling? No, I didn't. I choose to share them when it's appropriate. And when is it appropriate? Wow, that's called clinical judgment. People who tell me, well, what's clinical judgment? It's years and years of experience. Goes back to a little bit of what I tell people is that my fees, sometimes people are like, well, aren't your fees a little more expensive than most? I'm like, well, you're probably not paying for the session I'm doing today. You're paying for the 20 plus years of experience I have, personal as well as professional, in order to learn. So that happens. But you really need to have that balance. And sometimes I do share personal stuff. Sorry, Toronto, but yeah, I'm a Montrealer, not a big fan of Toronto at all. And so my clients sometimes know about that. And I share about my love-hate relationship with Toronto, being a Montrealer, talk about hockey. And yeah, I'm a big fake for some people. I'm a Canadiens fan first, Bruins second. And people are like, oh, you can't pull for both. Well, if you're a hockey fan, you can do whatever you want. And sometimes I share that, sometimes I don't. But ultimately, it's being able to be yourself. People want to know that you're a person. I've never met one of my clients saying, oh my God, you're too much of a person. Do I talk about myself for 40 of the 50 minutes? No. Do I spend sometimes opening up a little bit at the beginning or when it's appropriate? Yes. But it's clinical judgment. Sometimes I have a few clients, if I don't open up at the beginning of a session about, it didn't happen yet this week, but someone's going, how are you? I went to New York, had a great time or whatever. How are you? What's been going on? It opens the conversation for them and it opens the conversation for me. And we can go in the really good places with all that. So a few key points to remember. We're human. We make mistakes. It's a collaborative journey, as in clients and therapists learn from each other as much. And I really kind of like grow from all that. So those are my little points here. I hope this was helpful as a podcast. If you have any stories, I would love to hear your stories, your collaborative journeys, and in regards with your therapist and what you've learned or what you didn't learn or what was wrong or what was right. Please put it in. You can press a comment in my show notes on your favorite podcast, on your favorite platform. You can also write to me directly if you wish. My email is available on most platforms also. So please share me your own therapy misconceptions, what your journeys and how it went. So I do appreciate you sharing that. And of course, share it with friends, even if it's just a couple of minutes of this one or whatever, just share it with people. That's always important. So that is my conversation about therapy. But that's it for episode 198. Thank you for listening. Write to me as much as you want. But for episode 199, which is the final episode of Finding Your Way, Resilience, Development, and Action, we'll be talking to Karen Pascal. And I hope you join me then.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States and Canada.